He trusted his friend more than himself. Together, they were building a dream, a company that could make millions. But one signature behind his back changed everything. This is a story about how friendship turns to betrayal, and how money can destroy even the strongest bonds. Michael Harris, 32, a quiet and thoughtful programmer from Austin, always dreamed of creating something of his own. Working for a large IT company brought stability, but the feeling of creative emptiness grew with each passing day. He dreamed up projects, jotted down ideas, and dreamed of the day when he could work for himself. One evening, strolling through his old neighborhood, he accidentally ran into Eric Benson, an old friend from high school. Eric was, as always, charismatic. A confident gait, a smile that made it seem like he could do anything, and an energy that could ignite anyone. Michael and Eric were like yin and yang, one quiet, the other always the center of attention. Together they seemed invincible, but no one could have guessed that the strength of friendship could turn into weakness. Eric became interested in Michael's cybersecurity project and offered to help. "If you trust me, we can do this together. I know how to move things forward." Michael felt a surge of hope. He knew he wasn't alone anymore, but deep down he still doubted. Trust hadn't come easy. Eric invested $10,000, almost his entire savings, and became a co-owner of a project called CipherLink. The days were long: coffee, meetings, strategy discussions, late-night calls with potential partners. The first contracts were small, but they felt like victories. For the first time, Michael saw that his ideas could generate money. The office came alive. New employees, whiteboards with diagrams, computers with blinking codes. It felt like the beginning of a big story. But no one imagined how it would end. Eric was the life and soul of the company, scheduling meetings, selling ideas to investors and clients, and talking about the future revolution in cybersecurity. Michael remained a quiet creator, immersed in algorithms, but he felt their tandem worked perfectly. 6 months later, CipherLink signed a $250,000 contract with a major company. Michael could hardly believe his eyes. It was a dream come true. They rented their first office, hired employees, and began to attract media attention. Eric became the face of the brand: interviews, presentations, social media. Michael was proud of the result, but anxiety never left him. He remained in the shadows. He didn't like the camera. He loved the result. But that became his weakness. Evenings were spent analyzing contracts, discussing strategy, and late-night coding sessions. Michael understood that success had come quickly, and every mistake could now be costly. For the first time, he understood the value of trust and the importance of control over his decisions. After a few months, Michael began to notice the first cracks in their partnership. Eric was increasingly making decisions without Michael's approval, sometimes completely ignoring his opinion. In meetings, he began referring to himself as the project's founder, neglecting to mention Michael's role. Michael tried to ignore it, reminding himself that he hadn't created CipherLink for fame. But his anxiety grew. Small deceptions turned into major omissions, and public smiles concealed the tension behind closed office doors. Sometimes silence is an agreement, but the first step to disaster. One evening, Michael noticed that Eric had changed his investor presentation, adding his photo instead of their joint logo. Michael kept his emotions in check, but a feeling of betrayal grew inside. When the company attracted a major investor, Eric insisted on minor legal changes to the charter. Michael, tired from sleepless nights and completely trusting his friend, signed the documents without reading every line. A week later, he learned the terrible truth. Eric now owned a controlling stake. Michael had lost almost everything: the business he'd spent years building, and his sense of security. He realized he'd lost more than just the business. He'd lost a friend and a part of himself. The entire office was filled with tension. Employees whispered about changes, and Michael felt like an outsider in his own company. His hands trembled as he realized for the first time that the trust he'd given so easily had turned into a trap. Michael was fired under the guise of a reorganization. Eric publicly claimed that CipherLink's success was the result of his single-handed work. Michael disappeared from the media, withdrew into himself, and began rethinking everything he had built over the past years. When money comes in, people change, and sometimes they disappear completely. Every morning Michael got up, sat down at his laptop, and tried to figure out how to reclaim what had been lost. He was lonely. Everyone he considered colleagues and friends had turned their backs on him. Friends from school and former partners avoided contact. And for the first time, he felt that the business world could be cruel and merciless. In the silence of his small apartment, Michael pondered what to do next, how to restore justice and, most importantly, himself. He understood that he could not retreat, otherwise everything he had created would be lost forever. Michael tried to get his money back through the courts, but Eric's lawyers proved stronger. Every hearing turned into a psychological battle. Eric's lawyers played on his trust and silence, questioning his competence. Michael was left without a business, without a reputation, and without funds. He rented a small room, worked as a freelancer, barely making ends meet. Every morning he began with the thought, "How did I get into this?" Sometimes you need to fall to remember who you are. Despite his despair, Michael did not give up. He rewrote the code of old projects, studied documents, analyzed transactions. Even in the darkest moments, he sought a chance to restore justice. One night, while sorting through old CipherLink files, Michael noticed strange entries. Eric was selling client data to third parties, breaking all laws. At first, Michael didn't believe it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Emails, internal documents, transactions. He realized he had a chance not only to restore justice, but also to save the clients who trusted their company. He could have remained silent, but he chose to tell the truth. For several days, Michael collected all the information, documented every detail, verified every figure. His sleepless nights became sleepless again, but now it was for something bigger than just his own business. For justice. Michael handed over evidence to journalists and the FBI. CipherLink soon found itself at the center of a high-profile investigation. The company's stock plummeted, and Eric disappeared from the media, leaving behind only empty promises and a tarnished reputation. Sometimes justice doesn't bring wealth, but it does bring peace. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt relief. His name was cleared, his integrity restored. He realized that sometimes the real victory isn't money, but the restoration of one's dignity. Employees who had once trusted Eric returned to thank Michael. Some even offered him work on a new project. A year later, Eric was convicted of fraud and breach of client confidentiality. The trial was heavily covered by the media, reports, interviews, and analytical articles. Michael gave his only interview, speaking calmly but with deep emotional involvement. "I don't want revenge. I want people to know. Trust can't be signed blindly." CipherLink ultimately went bankrupt, but Michael's name was restored. His colleagues and clients began to trust him again. He understood that the loss of business was a bitter but necessary lesson, and the restoration of integrity was a victory that was more important than money. Sometimes, what seems like defeat is actually preparation for a new beginning. Michael created a new project, Horizon Shield, a company with transparent policies and no outside investors. He personally hired people he'd lost or worked with before. The office was modest but filled with energy and trust. Every employee knew their ideas were important, and their work was judged on merit, not charisma. Michael felt inspired and responsible again. Now, I didn't speak loudly. My actions spoke for me. And that feeling was better than any recognition. He understood the true strength lies in honesty and transparency. And his past betrayal had taught him a valuable lesson. Trust, but verify. And be prepared to defend your ideas. Sometimes defeat isn't the end. It's a way to clear the path to a true beginning. Michael realized losing everything isn't scary. What's scary is losing yourself. The story ends on a note of hope. Michael has regained his sense of purpose, restored his reputation, and realized that true victory lies in fortitude and faith in one's principles.